Live. I'm your host, Dylan Anderson, joined today by my teammate, Mr. Shannon Mortlock. Welcome.
Glad to be here again.
And today we are also joined by Austrian Grand Prix podium finisher and driver of the round, Fletcher Sermon. Fletcher, welcome to the podcast tonight.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Obviously, we're running a little bit of a different schedule today. Obviously, we delayed yesterday's podcast to today, and we're obviously on the eve of the German Grand Prix. Just going to reflect back on the Austrian Grand Prix. Obviously, Brandon Tanti picking up his maiden pole position there ahead of yourself, Shannon Mortlock, with 2/10 back to Kurt Dunn. Shannon, just explain to us in a few words how it felt losing the Austrian Grand Prix pole position by such a small margin to Brandon Tanti.
Honestly, I was pretty stoked with the second because I didn't think I had that much ace around Austria, but so yeah, obviously as usual, a bit frustrated, but I think we all knew Brandon was going to be quick and hard to beat, so just try and beat him next time.
Yeah, absolutely. He's obviously led from the start of the race, disappeared off into the sunset, claimed his maiden Austrian Grand Prix, which seemed to sort of surprise a lot of people that he hadn't won the Austrian Grand Prix before, but obviously finishing ahead of both McLarens, with Oscar finishing ahead of Ryan Lowe, ahead of yourself, Shannon Mortlock in P4, Austin Smedley in P5, Kurt Dunn after some early contact with yourself at the final corner in P6. We've got Mitchell Collin in P7, Fletcher Sermon in P8, Harry Ryan in P9, myself in P10, Steve Shadlow in P11, Ben Matchett P12, and Trent Fuller in P13. It was interesting to take out of those results is that obviously no DNF finishes, which is obviously good for the feature race because obviously with the reverse grid it really maximises how far back the drivers have to start in the reverse grid race. Fletcher, obviously P8, difficult, but another points finish, I should say, in the feature race there. Tell us a little bit about your time in the Austrian Grand Prix sprint race.
The sprint race wasn't too bad. I did have a couple of great battles towards the back of the grid.
Mm.
It could have finished real early with me almost bidding it at the pit entry, but somehow managed to recover and finish P8.
Yeah, absolutely. It was we saw the footage after the race, and it was quite a heavy impact into the sort of the pit lane wall on the entry there. What do you think that kind of sparked that? Was it touching the grass? Was a little bit of oversteer coming into the pit lane? What do you think sort of kicked off that moment of potential retirement?
I think it was more to do with me coming into the pit lane too hot and trying to hit the brakes too quick. Just locked up the rears and almost rotated around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Luckily the wall was there to save me.
Yeah. Obviously using my suspension from the Monaco Grand Prix. We're going to have a look at the feature race now. Obviously, you started on the third row, I believe. Went on to hold on and claim your maiden maiden podium finish, I should say, behind both McLarens. How did that podium finish feel to you, obviously on the anniversary of your debut within the F1OWC back in Season 9?
That was a great feeling, just being up on the podium without any doubts of a penalty this time. I was up there at Spain, obviously, but a penalty which was deserved after closer inspection cost me the podium. Yet being up there knowing that I've kept the podium, it felt great.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, finishing, I believe you crossed the line in P2 ahead of Ryan Lowe, only to lose it on a track limit penalty. It's definitely a fantastic way to obviously claim your first podium finish on, at the circuit where you made your debut, but in obviously better circumstances than what has happened at Spain. Obviously, small chances of another podium finish there in France. It's definitely a good trend of performances on track. How do you feel that your performances as a driver in Season 12 has developed over your time in the F1OWC?
Yeah, they've stepped up a whole bunch, especially from last season where I think I had 13 DNFs,
Mm.
which is quite a lot to have. Um, yeah, last season I'm not really sure how much I could have improved without the DNFs, but driving more consistently, I found a lot better performance and higher result finishes.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's the points that you've gained at this point of the championship already is more than what you had at the same time last season. I think that the consistent finishing um, is good for yourself and obviously for the team as well. Being able to bank consistent performances, even if they aren't top point finishing results. As you said, the 13 retirements in a season is nothing to sort of gloat about. Do you think that this change of sort of consistency in your own driving ability is due to the departure of Steve Shadlow from the team after Spain?
I mean, after Spain, my performance stepped up a lot because I was considered the number one driver of Ferrari, and
Mm-hmm.
that's given me a massive confidence boost. And I'd say yes, in a way that it's helped me become a lot better as a driver.
Mm-hmm.
But also losing Steve has lost a teammate. It's like as good of a teammate Trent is in the constructors. It's going to be hard now for
Yeah,
both of us, really.
yeah, especially with the battle that's appears to be heating up between Haas F1 and Ferrari. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. Shannon, obviously difficult weekend for Toro Rosso at Austria. Despite your P4 performance in the sprint race, it was a bit of a sort of blunder on strategy call in the feature race boxing for dry tyres when obviously the optimum strategy was to stay out on the intermediates. What's your take on the Austrian Grand Prix from a Toro Rosso perspective?
Yeah, yeah, not ideal. I think we both had pace. We were pretty comfortable that we could get some good results out of it, but yeah, we were on for a very good result in the feature, and yeah, we screwed our strategy again. So hopefully we'll learn eventually and actually get our strategy right. But yeah, it was disappointing for the both of us, but yeah, we'll do it better next time, hopefully.
Yeah, I can agree to that. Obviously, starting on the intermediates in heavy rain conditions was a big question mark. Obviously, after what happened in Baku, with a lot of those guys starting on the intermediate tyres and finishing quite high, it was a
Yeah,
gamble. It was a gamble that Toro Rosso could really afford to take. If it paid off, it would have been great. Obviously, I believe we were sitting in provisional sort of third and fourth with
yeah,
Fletcher and oh no, Fletcher was leading the way, and it was second and third, and Oscar was there as well. We
yeah,
were a clear gap away from the guys that had boxed. Um, Obviously, yourself struggled with some tyre wear on the intermediates, which kind of forced you into a pit stop, as the
yeah,
cars behind were, catching at a rapid rate of knots, and you had really nothing to lose. Myself, I had some small wing damage from touching the back of Fletcher's Ferrari at turn two, so ultimately the cars behind were again, catching, and it was a no-brainer for me to, box and not stay out with a damaged front wing. I think if the strategy played out, I think it could have been really, really good for Toro Rosso. I think ultimately, you know, our misfortunes on strategy, paved the way for Fletcher to pick up his podium. So there's positives to be taken in that. Obviously, Brandon Tanti and Kurt Dunn picking up a fourth and fifth for Renault. Brandon picking up the fastest lap, so it's a good recovery for him. Oscar Smedley in P6, Ben Matchett in P8. Another good points finish for Haas F1. Another 4 points there. He's definitely keeping these consistent run of points finishes, which is fantastic for himself. Obviously, big motivation after coming back and doing what he did in France. Myself and P9, Harry Ryan picking up 1 point. P10, a little bit disappointing for Harry Ryan, obviously coming into Red Bull's home track. I'm sure he would have been looking to get more out of that. Mitchell Collin in P11 outside the points. Steve Shadlow in P12. Trent Fuller P13. And in both races, no retirements in both of those races, so that's pretty good. Fletcher Sermon picking up driver of the round for the Austrian Grand Prix. I think well deserved, obviously bouncing back from the heartbreak of losing that podium finish in Barcelona and getting punted out of the lead in France to come back and get a podium. Yeah, as I said, on the home of his debut race in the F1OWC. I think it was really fitting. Fletcher, what does it mean for you to pick up driver of the round in F1OWC?
Oh, it's a great feeling knowing that I can pick up driver of the round with all the great drivers in the league. Honourable mention to Oscar, who had a phenomenal 2 races at Austria. Who, in all honesty, I would have had him as driver of the day, but luck fell my way in the second race, and I'm happy I came away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. The season that Oscar's been having is phenomenal, and I'm sure he will get his moment in the light. We will, however, touch on that later on, and we're going to move into the British Grand Prix. Obviously, the sort of big headlines that Brian Cruz had sort of poked his head out of retirement to return to Mercedes AMG Petronas in his championship winning team from season 7. Obviously potentially caused a little bit of controversy with some of the drivers. Some clarification on that. Any driver that wins a world championship, regardless if they're active or not in a full-time season, will always have a place on the grid. For him to come back out of retirement, he was sitting in provisional pole position, which everyone was like, okay, comes out, he's still got the pace to win and to do well, and puts it on pole, and then Oscar Grant in the McLaren comes home and goes 2.5 tenths faster than Brian Cruz in the Mercedes, and nearly half a second faster than Ryan Lowe in qualifying. Shannon, what's your take on Oscar Grant's performance in qualifying and in season 12?
Well, in qualifying, I think we're all a bit shocked by Brandon coming out of retirement and going so quick. But then for Oscar to go even quicker than that, it was a very big shock at the time, but looking back on it, he's been in form and had the pace, so I think he would have been the favourite to take pole had Brian not been there. But yeah, he's been having an excellent season. Had a bit of a sketchy start to it, but he's picked it up now.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking back at the results, podium in Australia, P3 in Australia, P3 in Bahrain, picked up his first win in China, and then China feature both Baku. Baku was very difficult for Oscar, and obviously a few of the drivers have had that this season, obviously with Ryan Lowe having a difficult Spanish Grand Prix. Brandon's been inconsistent based on last season's performance, but he's also still been very consistent. He's had his difficult rounds, but obviously Oscar Grant winning the sprint race at Silverstone, picking up his 5th win of the season and his 13th podium finish, which moves him 2 points ahead of Brandon Tanti in the championship, to lead the championship going into the second half of the season. Shannon, what do you think the likelihood of Oscar Grant walking away with the season 12 championship on the basis that Brandon Tanti and Ryan Lowe have been so inconsistent in season 12?
Well, at the moment it's hard to tell because everyone's sort of had a few bad races, but it's just hard to tell who's gonna continue as they are. Like, because Oscar's on such a good run of points at the moment, I think it's very possible that he'll build up a gap if he keeps going the way he goes. And yeah, he could end up winning it, but Brandon's tough to beat. So
yeah, absolutely. You can never really write off Brandon in a championship battle over the entire season. Obviously, the last few rounds have demonstrated that Brandon can be quick on his day, but probably his mistakes have been more sort of prominent this season than what they have been last season. Maybe that's been amplified by the season 12 format compared to the season 11 format. Me personally, I prefer the season 11 format as it suggested that it promoted less sort of carnage in the races. Looking at the sprint race, we're going to run through the results for Silverstone. Oscar Grant with a P1, Harry Ryan in P2, Ryan Lowe P3, so another double McLaren podium finish. Is fantastic for them. They're both Williams, Mitchell Collin ahead of Austin Smedley, then Kurt Dunn in P6, Brian Cruz P7 after crashing on his own accord at turn 2, making contact with the wall, losing his wing, recovered to get the fastest lap. Then myself, Dylan Anderson in P8, Ben Matchett, another points finish for him. Steve Shadlow, points finish. Obviously, he finished ahead of Brian Cruz there coming out of the final corner, crossing the line, but then there was a 10-second time penalty to him for effectively overtaking a car off the track. But because the run to the finish line is so short, he crossed the line before he had time to readdress it. He tried to appeal that. We'd looked at it, and unfortunately, the 10-second penalty had to stand, which should put Steve down into P10. Fletcher Sermon P11, Shannon Mortlock P12, Brandon Tanti in P13. Now Shannon and Brandon both were disqualified from the race for failing to effectively use 2 dry compounds. Shannon, do you want to explain from your perspective your thoughts on that disqualification and how it came about?
Well, yeah, so me and Brandon both opted to qualify on the mediums because we were both planning on doing the whole race on the mediums because we believed that we could make it to the end without having to pit to go onto an inter tyre.
Mm-hmm.
But we believed that because it started raining that you no longer had to pit.
Yeah.
Obviously that wasn't true.
Yeah, well that's right. It's definitely proven otherwise that, and especially with with Brandon Tanti, 3-time world champion driver of his caliber, effectively throwing away a big chunk of points, balances it out obviously with Ryan Lowe losing a big chunk of points in Canada with his retirement, but Oscar Grant's keeping that consistency for now. I think he's handling himself really well on and off the track. But as you said, you can't discredit any of the other drivers. I think the big surprise here was Harry Ryan picking up 2 podium finishes for Aston Martin Red Bull Racing. Obviously, their factory's not too far away from there in Milton Keynes. Obviously, after a difficult Grand Prix at Austria, it was good for him to come back and get some good points on the board. We're going to have a look at the feature race results now. Brian Cruz returns Mercedes to the top step of the podium for the first time since season 8, where Brandon Tanti won his first championship for Mercedes. Fantastic for him, obviously coming out of retirement, taking the top step of that podium, picking up the fastest lap. Ryan Lowe in P2, Harry Ryan in P3, Oscar Grant P4, Brandon Tanti 10 points in P5, Mitchell Collin, good points haul for Mitchell in the British Grand Prix. Then myself, Dylan, ahead of Kurt, who picked up a penalty. Then Austin Smedley in P9, Shannon Mortlock in P10, Steve Shadlow in P11, Ben Matchett in P12, Trent Fuller in P13, and Fletcher Sermon in P14, who had that penalty applied for the one that was carried over from the sprint race. Fletcher, obviously big carnage in the sprint race. little bit of a touch up with Mitchell Collin going through turn 1. Ended up making contact with Harry Ryan into turn 3 before being dispatched at turn 5 by Steve Shadlow. What's your thoughts on a rather colourful start to the British Grand Prix, contrasting to the good result that happened in Austria?
The start of the race, Shit was an amazing start. I think I got up to P8 by turn 1 and just made contact with the back of Mitchell. It was minor contact, but as soon as he spun, I knew I was going to get a penalty for it. Then going down to turn 3, I broke a bit later to try and get up the inside of Harry, bounced off his side pod. He bounced into Shannon by the looks of it, and ended up spinning due to contact off me. And then I somehow managed to avoid a spinning Harry, got back onto the track, but joined right in front of Steve, and we both managed to go around. And I'm pretty sure it was my first run-in with Steve since I haven't been his teammate, so...
Yeah, definitely no love lost there in the garage between you two. Steve's come through with a question. He goes, question for me, Dylan. Seeing as you're back to using a wheel, have you noticed much difference between switching back and forth between the wheel and the controller? Seeing as I haven't really gone back to the same form that I was hitting on the wheel in seasons prior. I think that's a fantastic question. Obviously in season 9 it was a big step for me. Obviously the practice that Brandon and myself did at Red Bull was unquestioned. We were doing 7-8 hours practice before the official practices. Now that's back when we had a whole session just for practice. The effort that was put in then was, it paid off. I ended up finishing 4th in the championship. Had a couple of wins, obviously that win at Monaco and the pole and the win at Japan. It was really good. Made the switch to the Fanatec. Raced testing and a couple of rounds on that before handing that off to Shannon, who currently operates on that now. The reason behind selling the Fanatec was because I was going into go-karting and I wanted to focus more time on that, while still operating on a controller and trying to be a part of the F1OWC despite not being in a position to win races and contest podium finishes. Obviously going into season 11 still on the controller, I had a bit of an issue with the controller where I wasn't able to get full steering lock, which cost me at quite a few races where effectively you'd turn into a corner and the steering would open up mid-corner and you'd end up needing to brake more and you lost a lot of time. So I feel that if I didn't have as many bad races on the controller, I probably would have stayed with it because I was quite content, doing what I was doing on the controller. But obviously coming back to a wheel now, obviously the seat that I'm using is more of a GT style seat as opposed to the play seat that I had before, which I'd given to Shannon. Seating position plays massive in terms of your feel of the car. I'm running medium TC now, where before I was running no TC, and that's just purely down to time invested into practice outside of the official sessions. Am I as quick as I once was? No, I'm not. But having said that, the caliber of racing around everyone at the moment in season 11 and season 12 is night and day to what it was in season 9 and seasons prior to that. Like you'd have in those seasons, you'd have probably 1 or 2, maybe 3 drivers that were on the pace every race, and you knew that if you had a half decent race at say 80%, you were still going to finish top 4, top 5. Where now everyone in the top 10 could potentially contest for a podium on their day, and I think that that level of competition has been unseen in the series. Do I feel that I need to put a little bit more into practice and trying to extract more out of it? Yeah, absolutely. I think this fast-tracked format in Season 12 doesn't suit sort of my practice schedule, and obviously trying to administrate the series between sessions and between days and doing the podcast either side of the week definitely takes a lot out of time that I can spend practicing. But I think, I'm looking forward to returning in Season 13 and giving it a good crack and trying to go back to no TC. But yeah, definitely going back to Steve's question, that the difference between a wheel and the controller was night and day. But yeah, I don't feel I'm as good as I once was. We're going to just have a look at the championship points now for the conclusion of the British Grand Prix, and we have Oscar Grant 312 points, Brandon Tanti 310 points, Ryan Lowe in 283 points. Harry Ryan jumps up 2 spots into fourth with 202 points. Kurt Dunn on 190 points. Shannon Mortlock 176 points. Mitchell Collin 168 points. Austin Smedley 157. Dylan Anderson 133 points. Fletcher Sermon on 49 points. Brian Cruz with his one race effort 33 points. Steve Shadlow 17 points. Ben Matchett moves ahead of his teammate on 14 points. Mitchell Hayward on 13 points. Trent Fuller on 2 points. So that's still a very tight championship. Obviously the front two are slowly stretching their legs. Harry Ryan moving ahead of Kurt Dunn is interesting for Red Bull's aspirations to a top 3 in the Drivers' Championship. Interesting to see how that all plays out over the course of the season. Shannon, German Grand Prix, you do hold the lap record with a 1:11.553 set in qualifying in Season 11. Also won the race for Red Bull in Season 11 sprint race. What's your thoughts heading into tonight's German Grand Prix?
Yeah, obviously would like to finally pick up either 2 good results or a win. Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see. I'm not sure who's going to be quick and who's not tonight, so looking forward to that, but yeah, should be an interesting one.
Yeah, it's definitely a interesting track layout. I enjoy it, but it's not one of my favourites. Obviously, the Hockenheim Ring debuted in Season 3, replacing the Nürburgring, which I had won twice in Season 1 and Season 2. Chris Padajak picked up the debut win for Williams in Season 3, then myself, Dylan, in Season 4 for Mercedes, and then it was off the calendar altogether in Season 5 and 6, and then Brian Cruz returned for a win for Mercedes in Season 7, and a win for Mercedes in Season 8. Then it was off the calendar again in Season 9, and then Brandon Tanti returned in Season 10 for Ferrari, picking up a win, then yourself, Shannon, for Red Bull in the sprint, and then Oscar Grant picking up a win in the Season 11 feature race. Obviously, the form that Oscar is currently in, I wouldn't sort of overlook him for a good result again in the German Grand Prix. Fletcher, what's your thoughts on the German Grand Prix tonight?
I reckon it's going to be a fairly close battle for the top 5 positions. Actually, I could easily see it being won on penalties, being how close the grid is.
Yeah, absolutely. Turn 1 is, requires bloody full commitment, but, again, as you said, penalties is going to be massive tonight, especially with track extending. At turn 1, it's probably one of the harder corners on the calendar, I think, taking turn 1, especially in qualifying, trying to take it flat. me personally, obviously winning it back in season 4 for Mercedes is a track that I have tasted success on. I'm like Shannon, just hoping to have a good race tonight, bank some good points for Toro Rosso, and hopefully Toro Rosso can give us some good strategies tonight, which has definitely caused the team some points loss and podiums loss over the last couple of rounds. Ryan Lowe sent in a message into the group chat. Is the increasing pressure on Brandon from both McLaren drivers causing Brandon to make these rare mistakes in strategy and decision making? I think yes. Touching on some comments that I made before, that in seasons past it's been one or two guys at the front, and then you kind of sort of had a mixture of everyone else, but you'd kind of have a rough idea who was going to do well. The competition this season's been fantastic. I think these mistakes that Brandon that he is making, I should say, is down to the format being more condensed, having back-to-back races between the sprint and the feature, not having enough time to sort of work in a rhythm and work in a setup with pre-practice and all that sort of stuff. Has the mistakes been massive in terms of contact with other drivers? No, but they've been more frequent than what they have been in the past. Fletcher, what's your thoughts on the season 12 format as opposed to the season 11 format?
It's a lot more intense, I can say that. It's hard to get used to, really. Going from racing once every 2 to 3 weeks to racing 3 rounds in 1 week.
Yep. Yeah, obviously.
Like, a lot less practice, obviously, but it's good for the drivers at the back of the grid to pop up a surprise result every now and then.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's been demonstrated this season with the likes of yourself and Austin and Mitchell Collin and those guys getting on the podium and getting high points finishes more frequently, and seeing some of these mistakes from Brandon and Ryan and all that sort of stuff, and obviously Shannon and myself making some poor strategy decisions as well, definitely opens up the the field in terms of being able to get good results, especially with Ben Matchett picking up some good points for Haas. Shannon, what's your thoughts on the season 12 format as opposed to the season 11 format?
Yeah, I reckon, as said before, it's definitely put a lot more pressure on the drivers. Changed their routine, changed how much practice they can do. It's definitely been the case for me. I'm struggling with it, but yeah, I do miss the format of last season, but no, it's still good because having so many races so often, it's awesome. But yeah,
Absolutely. The more racing is good. I think the season 12 regulations has its pros and cons, as did the season 11 regulations having its pros and cons. Obviously, season 11 being spread out over a 10-month period, as Fletcher said. Every 2-3 weeks having one round. Now we're having 3 rounds per week to try and finish it up. We do have another sort of 3.5 weeks of this season, which will wrap up and crown someone a champion, and then we'll have a month off, which I am looking forward to. From administration duties of the series. But coming back into season 13, do you feel that we could which direction do you think that we should go with, having the season 11 regulations but having the races sort of more frequently, or do you like this sort of happy hour format of the current season, Shannon?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I've enjoyed it. I enjoy both of them, but it'd take the stress off a bit if we, and it'd take the stress off the administrators too. Oh, yeah,
Fletcher?
tough to say.
Um, I'm a bit of a mix. I'm enjoying racing a lot more because it gives us something to do whilst stuck inside with the isolation all day.
Mm.
But
Yeah,
on the other hand, racing too much, it does get a little bit boring towards the final race and that. So
yeah. Well, that's trying to find the balance of having more frequent races and not being burnt out is a interesting balance for everyone to find. Um, yeah, but like I said, looking forward to the time away from the F1OWC officially until the new game comes out. Should be really good. Obviously, looking at the German Grand Prix tonight, I'm hoping that we can have another clean round. Obviously, Austrian Grand Prix was fantastic for an administration perspective. Um, there was probably 3 incidents over both races, and they were pretty straightforward. British Grand Prix had quite a few in the sprint race, which took a little bit for us to sort of filter through, and because it was all a knock-on effect of you know who caused what and who rejoined. Obviously, Shannon, you feel a little bit hard done by picking up a 10-second penalty for your contact with Harry Ryan at turn 4. Just
Absolutely.
explain to us why you feel that way and the causations of the incident.
Yeah, so as I remember it, I got a pretty good start. Going up to turn 3, Harry was on the inside, so I went to his outside, and then I believe it was Fletcher that went up the inside of Harry, was it?
Yep.
Then contact was made there, I think, with me. And then I tried to stay around his outside and left him as much room as I could, but yeah, then I was on the inside curb and Harry made heavy contact with me. I don't know how I didn't get damage, and yeah, that's my that's my side of it. So I feel I didn't really do anything wrong. I was just putting my car where I thought it should have been.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've obviously submitted an official appeal to that 10-second
Yeah,
penalty, which is being looked at by the administrators. Essentially, the initial penalty was given out on the basis that contact was made with Harry Ryan, there was damage, and the administrators had taken the angle that you effectively drove into a wedge. Obviously, it was a causation of what's happened with Fletcher and Harry on the inside of the track. So there is cause there for appeal. It needs to be looked at closer by the administrators. Obviously, Fletcher being pushed wide there onto the runoff, and so was I. I was out there as well. There was been Steve Shadlow also put in a appeal on his penalty for spinning Fletcher at turn 5 on the grounds that it was an unsafe re-entry on Fletcher's behalf. Fletcher, what's your take on the re-entry in that particular incident?
I mean, it was a little unsafe, I can admit that, but I did look behind me, made sure there was room, and re-entered in a safe manner. I didn't go straight for the racing line. I did end up back on the racing line, and then no sooner than that, I did end up being spun.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen the footage from some other cars' views, and I can see on one hand that yes, they're claiming it as unsafe re-entry, and I think it was probably borderline. However, on the other side of the coin, the car that did make contact with yourself, there was enough distance on the track between when you come back on and when the contact was made for that car to avoid that. Um, Obviously, the contact was made, you'd found yourself into the fence and ruined, your race got ruined, the person that hit you had their race ruined. Unfortunately, that's a part of racing sometimes. Ultimately, you know, the amount of incidents that come out of that chain of corners was quite high. I think everyone was pretty understanding for the most part with the penalties that were given out. I think we're all, aware of the procedures now that, obviously penalties are given out in the sprint. If there is cause for concern or appeal, then that can be done after the feature race before the results are finalised, which is obviously, what a few drivers on the grid have done. But yeah, nonetheless, we will wrap this podcast up nice and early because we want to get some practice done for the German Grand Prix tonight. Shannon Mortlock, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And Mr. Fletcher Sermon, all the best in Germany tonight as well.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks, guys.